Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the CGLCC's 2020 Digital LGBT+ Global Business Summit. My name is Kevin Sullivan, and I'm with Export Development Canada, a proud sponsor of this summit and of this next session. I'm proud to be representing EDC as this is our third year as sponsors of this summit, our second as corporate partners, and I'm excited to say that this is our first year hosting a supplier diversity roundtable with representatives of EDC's procurement team. As an organization, we are growing and evolving year over year, and we would like to thank the CGLCC for being such a great partner in helping us to continue to move in the right direction. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's keynote session, our CEO panel discussing what the future of work looks like. Our esteemed panelists are Mr. Jad Shamali, Chairman and CEO of EY Canada, and Dr. Martine Rothblatt, Chairman and CEO of United Therapeutics Corporation. Our moderator for this session is Mr. David Anderson, founder and CEO of the Anderson Governance Group. Thank you and enjoy the session.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is David Anderson, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator for this session. And I want to welcome you to the Future of Work CEO panel, hosted by the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce for their 2020 digital conference. And of course, this is taking place in quite a momentous time. Not only are we in the midst of a COVID-19 pandemic in which this particular conference, digital conference, was conceived, but also at a vitally important time in our history in terms of Black Lives Matter and the racial diversity, ethnic diversity that we need to pay much closer attention to understand much more fully, and to integrate into not only our business lives, but more generally into our civic lives as well. And it is in all of these points of context, advancing the interests of the queer community, which is the Chamber of Commerce main interests, as well as in the context of a pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement, that we are convening this CEO panel on the future of work. The future is not clear in many respects, but we know that the elements of context that we're now addressing will have a lasting impact, we certainly hope so, on how we choose to go about commerce and make our society even better. So what I'd like to do is have an opening statement by each of our CEO guests of approximately 5 minutes each, followed by a moderated discussion among the CEO panel for about 20 minutes, and then open discussion questions from you, our audience, which will be moderated by the Chamber, sending questions to me on your behalf, and then some closing comments by each of our panelists. So let me first of all invite Dr. Rothblatt, Martine Rothblatt, an astounding individual of tremendous background, and she is going to talk at this outset, giving us her view as to this particular moment in history and how the future of work might change in the context of the leadership that she provides for her organization and her view looking from a U.S. lens in particular at this time. Martine, if I can invite you, please, to share your comments.
Thank you very much, David. And Jad, thank you for joining me and welcoming me on this panel. And I'd like to thank the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce for hosting this virtual event for everybody's benefit. At the outset, I'd like to first give recognition to the Aboriginal and Indigenous and First Nations peoples whose land we're on right now. And even though we're all operating through cyberspace, we shouldn't forget that cyberspace is ultimately grounded in real space and in real land. And that's where our server farms sit and all of those things and where we're sitting. And these lands we're on were first humanized by the First Nations and Indigenous peoples who have received about as raw a deal as one could imagine since the arrival of Europeans. So I'd like to, first give recognition and respect to them and thank them for sharing these lands with us. Secondly, especially at this time of Black Lives Matter, I'd like to pay homage and recognition to the Black people who were enslaved in Africa, brought to the Americas, and was made abundantly clear in a great book I read last year called The Empire of Cotton. Highly recommend this book because it makes really clear that the first global kind of biotechnology and the first kind of global, any kind of technology that existed was the globalization of cotton technology. And while it began with industrialization in England and Europe and local indigenous cotton cultivation in places like India and Africa and the Near East, it really became a globalized technology in the sense that we think of our own biotechnology and information technology, literally on the backs and out of the blood of the African Americans and African peoples who were brought to the Western Hemisphere. And the wealth that came from that blood, sweat, and tears of the Black people brought here is, in fact, the platform, the plinth, upon which all of the wealth that we have today in our technological society resides. So I think it's just as important for us to keep foremost in mind that the great quality of life that so much of us enjoy, the wonderful opportunities that the Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce is here to honor, owes its very breath, owes its very lives to the Black people who were, exploited horribly beyond recognition, and then even up to this day, shot in the back, shot in the face, kneeled to death on their necks. So, inspired by this history, I think, what is work going to be like in the future? And I think it should be about the best of humanity rather than the past, which was very much about the dominance of the worst of humanity. Not that there weren't great people going all the way back to time immemorial, there were. But I think the course of history was somewhat dominated by the worst of humanity. And we are very fortunate to live in the 21st century now, where there is a true dawning of realization that we can pivot all of human civilization from the worst of humanity to being dominated by the best of humanity. It's not going to be any utopia. People are as imperfect as you would expect after hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary development, not guided by any rule book or handbook or anything like that. So we're doing the best that we can. But one thing that I believe will help us to be guided by the best of humanity in our workplace is by always being in work groups where we know and trust everybody that we're working with. And this brings me to a concept that has been developed by social anthropologists over the past few years. The idea that there is an optimum numerical range for human interaction and working, something in the order of 50, 100, 150 people, something in that ballpark, where we have the ability to know each person face to face, to know something about their family and their life and their likes and their dislikes, and to form a bond of trust and kinship with them. And it doesn't mean that you can't have larger organizations, but that these larger organizations would be like so many cells of smaller organizations built up. And I call this sort of like a mitotic concept of workplace management, where when a work group begins to get larger than 50, 100, 150 people, it kind of mitoses into separate work groups. and then again and again and again. So you can build huge scale, but the people that you immediately work with, instead of us all being like automatons on an assembly line, or just, a blur of endless cubicles, or just, anonymous pixels on a screen with anonymous people that we interact with. Instead, the people that we interact with and we work with, we should know each and every one of them, and they should know us. And so this kind of, 50, 100, 150 person size workplace management, a workplace governed by personal based trust and confidence, is what I see as the future of the workplace.
Martine, thank you. I think the meiotic concept of workplace management, I wrote that down. I want to learn more about that. That sounds absolutely extraordinary. And you're quite right in identifying some fascinating anthropological studies and psychological studies of workplace management that we'll need to pay more attention to, and to get to know people on a personal level and understand how that scales. Thank you for your opening comments. Jacques Schmally is with us as well. Thank you, Jacques, for being here. And of course, it's your role as Chair and CEO of EY Canada to assist organizations, large and small, in various sectors, public, private, government, and the third sector, to help their effectiveness as organizations. And from that incredible vantage point, as well as being the leader of your own organization, what are you seeing, sir, as the future of work?
Thanks, David. I'd like to start by completely echoing Martine's point and acknowledging the lands we're on and the time of history we're currently operating within. I am optimistic about the future. I know the phases we go through we're going through one painful phase after the other, from health to financial to societal. And but with all that said, I'm very optimistic about the future. And then I want to commend everyone who joined this conference. When David, you and I were talking a couple of days ago, it seems only on Monday, I told you being here today is important to me for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, the organizers and the topic, LGBT plus, in addition to business in Canada, two very important topics for many of us, definitely for me. But the other angle is that this is the new norm. I mean, you and I have only spoken once on the phone, but it feels that we know each other by now. And so we do need to jumpstart our communication. We do need to get used to how we interact with each other in the future and how we bring broader messages to the table and net new channels. So I need to congratulate the organizers and commend everyone who joined the session today. So, I mean, it seems that the last 3 months have happened extremely, extremely quickly. The days are long, but the 3 months have been a complete blur. So for us, we moved from being in the office to being 100% remote within a few days. It did feel gradual within these few days because it moved one step after the other within over a span of a couple of weeks. But then suddenly now looking back, it feels very abrupt. And we're learning a lot as part of the process. I mean, I don't think any of us had expected to be operating under this structure and any near future, and it just happened to us relatively quickly. So we're all learning a lot, and we know that the cycle is going to reverse, and then we're going to head back to the offices. For us, as a firm in Canada, we moved about 6,000 plus people to work from home, and now we started a couple of weeks ago reopening some of our offices across the country. So we had 3 offices that reopened 2 weeks ago, obviously in phases, and now we're moving back next week to another tranche for another 3 offices, and eventually we'll get back to reopening one way or the other the 16 offices we have. So the big question that I have is that we learned a lot before this pandemic. We had learned a lot about what was working in the environment, what was working in our offices, what was working in the workplaces in general. And now we're learning that much more. As us being at home, us operating under a net new environment, we're learning a lot. So how can we eventually take the best of what we had pre-pandemic and take the best of what some of the things we're operating under now? And how can we create a much more optimistic and much more productive and happier future for all of us? we did send a survey at EY a couple of weeks ago. We sent it to all our people, and the survey was around the return back to office. And just yesterday, I got the data back. And initially, I was very surprised because within less than 24 hours, we had more than 2,500 people, so roughly more than a third of our people had responded. And this is unheard of for any survey. And eventually, we got to 70+% participation. I just want to go through some of the highlights of what we learned. So 89% of our people believe that they can work effectively from home. So 90% can work effectively from home. Close to 60% believe that the majority of their daily interaction can be effectively done remotely. And going forward, 43% would like to work from home forever. They don't want to come back to the office. 48% would like to work from home part-time. So only 9% would like to go back to life as it was in the pre-pandemic. And when I look at our people, our average age in the office is 28. So we have a younger, very diverse, younger workforce. And in my mind, if you had asked me the question a few weeks ago, I would have thought that the majority of the 25, 27, 30-year-olds would want to come back to the office for the interaction that we're all getting. So how can we learn from what we've done in the past, and how can we learn from these data points and everything we're hearing from our people and our clients, and take the best out of both worlds and bring it into the future? And for me, the couple of big questions that this brings up, in addition to what Martina said, that how can we hold on to a culture? How, when all of us are working from home, the majority of us not wanting to come back to the office for more than a day or two, how can we still hold on to the culture? How can we maintain the human touch beyond just the 2D virtual interaction that we're having? How can we really hold on to what's special about our culture as a firm, culture as clients, and culture as a society? I was communicating over the past couple of weeks around the Black Lives Matter topic, and the best advice I got from our Black professional network is to be human in our communication. So the one issue or the one caveat that I'll throw out there is that with us communicating a lot through these net new channels, are we losing what made us special in the first place, whether it's culture, whether it's just being human? So how do we get in touch with our humanity? How do we become better people as part of this process? And what's there to learn? So the challenge that I've been throwing out there for clients and organizations that I talk to are in twofold. That as organizations, we're learning a lot from what's going on. How can we hold on to the best lessons we have, so we don't only think about the operational aspect of going back to work, but we think broadly about how can we become better organizations and really hold on to a purpose, hold on to giving back to the communities where we live in net new levels. And for individuals, me included, how can we become better humans as part of it? How can we really broaden our view of the world, whether it's by everyone needs help now, the government needs help, the economy needs help, the organizations, companies need help, the communities need help, and as individuals, we all need help. So we have our ups and downs, our families, our colleagues. So how can we learn and become better humans as part of the process, and really take a lot of the time that we have now to either reflect or just come out stronger on the other side? So with that said, I'm really looking forward to the next half an hour now, plus I was told, and eventually continuing the debate and continuing the conversation. I'm very optimistic about what the future has to hold, but it's going to require a lot of effort.
Jean, thank you very much. I liked your thought about taking the best of what we thought we knew pre-pandemic and the best of what we're learning through the pandemic, and combining those, and some very similar resonances, I thought, with Martine's thoughts there too, when you talk about the need to not only be optimistic and look to our better selves and maintain a human touch, but to do so at a scale and with a humanity and a purpose and a cause that helps us build ourselves as individuals and also as our community and communities, I would say. And very helpful too to hear some data from your firm and getting that response rate. I certainly can say, as somebody who's done a lot of research, that that getting a response rate like that is certainly very positive and exciting to hear. It strikes me that this is so new. We're still so fresh in this moment, and we'll need, of course, the benefit of hindsight, as we move through this time to really understand the full ramifications. But I'm wondering, as you're advising, Jad, your clients, EY's clients here in Canada, about how you're the CEO clients you have and the organizations that you work with. What are you hearing from them, and what is some of the advice at this point in time you're offering them from a leadership point of view, per se, as to how to think about their reaction to how to react, how to be proactive potentially in the face of this enormous and unprecedented dislocation from the office, which kind of goes counter to the experience goes counter to Martine's point about trying to get us together in small groups and to really build that connection. So you're both identifying the need to do that. The situation is, of course, making that a little bit challenging. But what are you advising your clients, and what are you hearing from them, Jad?
I'm hearing, great question. Thank you, David. I'm going to approach it from a couple of angles. There's the tactical part of moving to work from home, then return to the office. That's still taking a lot of the agenda time. But what it takes to have a right system infrastructure, what does it take to have the right communication level? How do you treat it as a big change program? How do you remain close to your people? How do you even provide net new flexibility programs with us really having to deal with net new developments? I wouldn't be surprised if one of my daughters just walked into the door now and interrupted this. I warned them not to, but that never stopped them in the past. So how do we just give some of our people the flexibility that they need? So there's a big part of the debate that's really going around what I'm calling the tactical, but it's much more important than a tactical step that someone can take and move on. The bigger questions and the bigger debate becomes around how can organizations now really embrace inclusive capitalism? The debate had started a few months ago, or a few years ago, and then a few months ago, but how do we start measuring our success beyond just financial performance? How do we include every single aspect that's important to our society, whether it's the diversity and inclusiveness of our people, whether it's diversity and inclusiveness of our clients, whether it's how do we interact with our own vendors, how do we provide more use organizations within which we work and we operate to have a much bigger impact on the communities and societies that we live within. I mean, with EY, at least, I mean, we have a global footprint, right? We have 280,000 people across 150 plus countries. How do we use our presence as a platform to really drive our values across the world, and at least within the people that we either work with, we touch one way or the other, whether they're our own employees, our own partners, or their clients. So the debate around how do you measure performance in this net new world while the societal pressure are getting stronger, fairer, yet stronger, while the employees are becoming that much more critical for behavior, for organizational behavior that's not completely aligned with the times that we're currently living in. That anyone who's not progressive enough in their view of the world and how they measure their performance, the debate is very quickly going up the chain to say, okay, we're moving from using financials as the key metric for how we're measuring performance to having financial as one of many, many net new metrics. And at the core of this, organizations are really rethinking about resetting and rethinking their purpose. I mean, our purpose within the firm is to build a better working world. And what that means is whether it's by building trust in the organization, whether by having more of our alumni, more of our people giving back to our clients, giving back to the communities we live in, we have different ways to measure it. Obviously, the financial health is a decent part of it, but there are many, many other parameters that larger organizations are needing to wrestle with now. And many of them, rightfully so, are using this crisis, or the many crises that we live in, we're living through as a point to reset and get really back in touch with their purpose and put the structure and processes around them that will allow them to deliver on their promise.
Jean, thank you. That term, inclusive capitalism, strikes me as being one that's important and we should hear more of in the future. And you raised some very important points, I think, in terms of how we measure success beyond the financials. While this particular set of crises that we're in now are bringing many of these questions to the fore, there's been, as you will all know, a great deal of thoughtful work on many of these questions in decades past. And I do wonder if this particular set of crises will bring some of those more into focus. For many years, I've been a part of the ICGN, the International Corporate Governance Network, which is an association of institutional investors around the world representing trillions of dollars in assets under management. And for many, many years in that forum, as just one example, we've spent time talking about stakeholder engagement and ways of measuring corporate performance and societal outcomes that represents a sustainable path, not just for people, but for planet as well, and of course profit, as people sometimes talk about those 3 Ps. And I'm wondering, given what you said, Jean, maybe I can ask Martine to reflect and share with us some thinking, Martine, from your perspective in the leadership of organizations that you've created and run over time, United Therapeutics being your current focus as I understand it, but of course going back decades with remarkable entrepreneurial success from Sirius Satellite right through to the present. How do you interpret some of Jean's commentary there around the notion of inclusive capitalism, and what would you look to from a measurement point of view to help us move people and society more in the direction that we're now talking about?
Yeah, thanks, David. And all the great points that Jean mentioned really resonated with me a lot. So thank you for those thoughts, Jean. So at United Therapeutics, we had somewhat of a different experience than EY. All of our offices remained open throughout the entire pandemic, and I'm coming to you now from one of our offices. Legally, the reason is that we've all been deemed essential businesses under the rules and regulations because we're manufacturing medicines. We're manufacturing them continuously. If we stop manufacturing the medicines, then our ability of our patients' literal lives depend on getting their medicine month to month. We have complex efforts in research and development that if you turn off certain laboratory experiments, it can take a year to restart them. And in fact, 3 of our laboratory experiments relate directly to even COVID-19 and the sequelae of COVID-19, such as acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. So all of our offices have remained open. However, not everybody has come into the offices. We have a very easy, accurate way of knowing just from swiping on cards, how many cards have been swiped to come into the office and whatnot. So it's pretty steady that about 30 to 35% of our staff come into the office on a regular weekly basis. We have shifted to shift work so that we can maintain better physical separation between people. As a footnote, I think, an original sin of the public health community was to call things social distancing instead of physical distancing. But that's just a footnote, and I'll go back to the main text on that. And everybody else was instructed to, come into the office as they felt they needed to, and with various physical distancing protocols put in place, and obviously not to come in if you were frankly feeling ill or in a quarantine after being in contact with somebody. And when you were in the office, to be wearing a mask to help protect everybody else. So with those adjustments on a monthly basis, more than half of our staff have come into the office and out because they felt they needed to. So I think that that's another kind of metric, more of perhaps a somewhat qualitative/quantitative metric that shows that people feel a need for the physical presence that's involved in an office environment, whether they feel it's a job need, a professional need, or a personal need, or really, I'm not even sure how you unwind those three things, because the best people are people who feel that they are working on their purpose in life. That's kind of the essence of self-actualization. Is we don't like have this job just to pay our rent. Yes, we do have to pay our rent, but we have this particular job because we have a passion for information technology or agricultural technology or chemical engineering or social service work, whatever. It's a thing that's a passion for us, and our job and our passion are one and the same. So I really believe that, to me, inclusive capitalism means that you bring as many people's sense of self into the capitalist project as possible. As an example of this, a large part of our company has been incorporated as what's called a public benefit corporation in the United States. And a public benefit corporation is a form of corporation by law specified in the state of Delaware, where most US companies are headquartered. And the company has to have a public benefit that is equal, not less, not higher, equal to their profit-making purpose. So this gets to those three Ps, that you were talking about, people, profit, planet. And in our case, our public benefit is to create an unlimited supply of transplantable organs in a way that does not harm the global environment. And so we do this by building organ manufacturing facilities that are powered in a carbon neutral, zero carbon fashion. So we're hitting kind of all three Ps. The profits, because selling those organs is a profit-making business. The people, because the people making those organs and the people receiving those organs and those people's families, they're all invested in the success of United Therapeutics. And finally, the planet, because we're doing all of this in a zero carbon way.
Thank you, Martin. As I was listening to your thoughts there and integrating some of them with what we've heard Jod talk about, and also with my experience in advising boards of directors and CEOs, I think some people might be surprised at how much it weighs on the minds of CEOs, the mental health of the people who work with them and for them, and the culture that is produced through their leadership and through the actions of themselves as leaders and the executive team and managerial folks throughout their organizations. And I'm wondering if perhaps, and we'll start, if I may, Martin, inviting you on this point and follow up by Jod, please, on your reflections from a personal point of view, how you think about mental health in the work environment, looking, of course, as we are in this panel, to the future. In other words, what might change and where you would place emphasis based on your experience and your values and the opportunities you see through this experience. Martin, might you have a reflection on that?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think my first reflection is that I could do a much better job than I do. So I'm like, definitely a work in progress myself. And I feel that I could reach out, and we have 1,000 people in our company, and I could do a much better job. But let me reflect on a couple of things that I feel that bubble up from me that are right on point. First of all, we have an employee that just barely missed death from COVID, and he's still in the hospital. He's in his 20s, and he was unconscious on a ventilator, all this sort of stuff. So it strikes very close to home for us. Secondly, with regard to Black Lives Matter, we have a number of employees who have personally, either themselves or their immediate family members, faced police brutality. And fortunately, none of them died from it, but definitely all of them were scarred for life by it. And that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg when you talk about the police brutality. That's not even getting to the whole systemic level of racism, which in a way inflicts a death by 1,000 cuts, as is evidenced in the differential public health statistics that you can see by demography. So, once we got to this situation where the people who had to actually be coming into the laboratories to make medicines and conduct experiments, other people, such as the individuals that usually go to hospitals to conduct clinical trials or go to meet doctors to explain the uses and limitations of our medicines, could no longer do that because the hospitals were shut down or overcrowded. They couldn't be dealing with clinical trials, and patients couldn't go in except for emergency situations. So, first I reached out on social media. We have an internal social media. It's called Workplace. It's like a Facebook, but internal to the organization. And, that was something. We have an absolutely stellar, amazing chief people officer, Alyssa Friedrich, and she regularly, would be the source of communication to everybody. And I'm glad it was her and not me, because very interesting research was done before this pandemic that said whoever it is that gives the public health information to the nation, and we're just a company, not a nation, but the same point's going to apply, should not be, the president, because, in general, half the people are not going to believe that individual, because in general, half the people didn't vote for that individual. So we violated that law like in spades in the U.S. But I was glad that it wasn't me, who is not a people expert. I'm a technologist. I'm not a chief people officer. I was not the one giving the every week, here's the latest update. Check your temperature this way. Wear this kind of mask, not that kind of mask, so on and so forth. So we had the constant every week. But my sense was that people were hungry. People, these if I could say, administrative type of activities were not fulfilling the mental health need that you referred to in your question, David. So I began thinking, is there a way that I can actually get something physically to each and every person? And I asked our head of HR if we had a spreadsheet of everybody's addresses. I previously would have had no need to it because I just email people, but we did, have a spreadsheet of everybody's addresses. And then I found that there are these different companies that would actually mail things to people's snail mail, old school physical addresses. So I searched around for products that would, have a light carbon footprint, but would nevertheless be meaningful to people, and that I could include like a mass note. That went to everybody's homes. We sent little care packages of like little sterilizing things and stuff like that to everybody's homes with a personal note. I found a company, I might as well give them an ad here, handwritten with a Y instead of a I, that you can digitize your handwriting, and then you can write a note, and it's snail mailed, by little robots doing the licking, so we have to worry about that, and mailed out to 1,000 people's home addresses. And the responses I got back from everybody was amazing. It's like, wow, Martin, getting this physical thing in a time of physical distance, it means a lot. It really meant a lot to people. People wrote me back notes, physical notes, as well as email notes and social media postings. So I think that, we live in a physical world. Just because we have electric heaters and gas heaters doesn't mean that we don't love sitting around a campfire, and that there's a magic to spending time around a campfire with somebody that I think you can't replace. You'll always remember who you were around that campfire with. And just because we live in a digital world, and I love our digital world with all of our pixels, all of our webcasts, all of our Zooms, et cetera, it doesn't mean that we can't also do physical things. And we need those physical things, and we treasure those physical things. So my short answer, how to keep our mental health, is to keep the physical in our life.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Martin. I think that's a wonderful gesture. I'm sure it was perceived as quite meaningful as you're suggesting. And I just pick up on a bit of language you used there around physical distancing, which I think is much preferred, at least in my way of thinking, to this notion of social distancing.
Thank you. I feel the same way.
I think it was an unfortunate choice of language up front at the beginning that kind of stuck. We need more social cohesion, not social distancing, but we need physical distancing in the context of a pandemic that's spread physically. So thank you for that. Jad, if I may, back to you on this notion of mental health, and as CEO, chair of your organization, and of course, the leadership that you see through your work with clients. Might you share with us some of your insights or observations, things that you think you do or you've seen others do well, and maybe things that you would advise perhaps against in helping to improve or to be aware of and to support the mental health of employees as we go through this set of crises?
Yeah, thanks, David. The current times have been one layer of added stress on top of the other, right? I mean, when we first started a few months ago, health was the biggest concern, physical health, that is. Then it became very quickly hearing from our people who have not spoken to anyone, who have not met anyone for 3-4 weeks. They haven't even left their apartment in 3-4 weeks plus. Feel very excluded. So mental health started becoming a bigger part of the process, or a bigger part of the debate, especially when you start thinking and looking around you and seeing the level of unemployment shooting up, right? So it has added one level of stress, one level of angst on top of the other. So communication, I completely agree with Martin, but communication has become key. For the longest time, walking across the hallways, bumping into someone, asking how they were doing, was a big part of how we stayed in touch, a big part of how we kept our finger on the pulse and figured out who from our friends, from our colleagues might have needed help or could have helped others. And at this point, in some cases, we've lost complete touch. So finding new ways and new mechanisms to remain in touch, even just having something as simple as a virtual coffee, reaching out to people, getting their opinion on things, it has been a huge added benefit in how we're trying to lead within the organization. And then for me, I moved from talking to my partners once every 3 months in a formal way, talking to our people once or twice a year in a formal way, to now having bi-weekly webcasts, to now having bi-weekly touch points one way or the other. So staying in touch is a huge part of it. The other thing that we did is that we added mental health support as part of our benefit. So we have Beacon Health, the Mind Beacon Institute, that we have we added them to our health benefit, where a lot of our people have access, actually all our people have access to mental health support. And just demystifying and taking the mystique and any negative connotation from people needing, from someone raising their hand to needing health support for mental health. And even by me talking about the level of stress that I go through, talking about my daughter who deals with anxiety. So just opening up the debate to making sure that it's normal. I mean, it's the new norm. The level of stress is only going to accentuate it. I was reading the statistics not long time ago, and I didn't want to quoted because I don't remember the details, but it's a very high percentage of the Canadian population, double digit that is going to go through mental health issues or mental health pressure over the next foreseeable future, if not already. When you look around you and just start thinking that odds are that if you add two more to this panel, one of us, if not more, would be dealing with significant mental health issues, ideally temporary. But when we start talking about the diversity of thought that we need to bring to the table, when we start thinking about the fact that we need to celebrate our differences, when we start talking about the fact that we're not expected to think the same way, we're not expected to react the same way to different crises, then by default, we should expect that we're dealing with pressure differently as individuals, as human beings. So we should be celebrating those differences, and we should be creating a platform, whether it's a human touch or other benefit type mechanisms to allow for our people to just talk, open up, bring ideas to the table, but at the same time bring their true self to the table. Which, guess what? A big part of it is part of the true self that is dealing with significant mental health issues, and we should be celebrating those, not trying to avoid them or skate around them.
Yes, I think many things that you said that were important and worth paying attention to. One thing in particular that I heard in that was the approach that you've taken of late in these series of challenges and crises that we're in, to reach out on a personal level with much greater frequency to your employee population and probably, I'm intuiting, your client base as well. And I, although Martine didn't talk about it in precisely the same way, she's doing the same thing, which is wonderful to see both of you as leaders taking this approach with your respective employee populations. And although the word authenticity might be much overused, potentially, it really strikes me as being relevant and on point in terms of as a term to use in this context, that when we are more physically distant and dislocated in many ways, people look to the leadership, not necessarily just an individual person, but leaders through a hierarchy of an organization to be authentic, to bring that authenticity, and to invite the same of them. And I think that really becomes a very important point when we are thinking about diversity and thinking about being respectful and open and creating environments that are inclusive, creating that inclusive capitalism that we've talked about a few times. And I wonder if, with that as a jumping off point, if I might invite each of you, and perhaps I'll start with Martine, how are you thinking about diversity actions that your organization is taking, or that you see others take that you think are valid and useful and effective in trying to create spaces that are not just welcoming in a superficial way, but that actually address the core issues of identity, so that when people are attracted to your work environment and come to your work environment, either physically or virtually, that they're bringing the best of themselves, a comment that Jad had made earlier, and are presenting themselves in a way that is authentic to themselves, resonating with the leadership, and actually adding contribution as a result, a full contribution to the organization. Martine, may I start with you, and then we'll ask Jad the same?
Sure. We do, of course, we pride ourselves, if I could say, like in Pride Month, to be open and diverse to all different identities that people have. And we put this in our promotional information. We have ongoing internal education and training programs, so people are more aware of the queer point of view, the Black point of view, and that there is not a queer point of view or a Black point of view, but that, there are some experiences common to all queer people and common to all Black people, but there are as many different points of view as there are queer people, and as many different points of view as there are different Black people. So being able to understand that, being a demographic minority has almost always resulted in a level of oppression historically by the majority. But just being part of a demographic minority takes nothing away from your individuality. In fact, if anything, it adds, I think, to your individuality. So we try our best to share these perspectives and to have other what we call Unitherians, United Therapeutics employees, speak about their own feelings in this regard and question and challenge everything. So I think like we're far from perfect, but we're doing better. We have one of the highest percentages of female representation on our board of directors of any publicly traded company. We're at like 40% female board, and we are at or above 40% in terms of workplace and in terms of all the different executive levels and so what. So we're doing good things. The metric that is really important to me is this metric that we call voluntary turnover. It's how many people decide to quit, what percentage of people decide to quit, and how does that vary, from other companies? Because it's a very clear-cut number of people are like leaving you quickly. Probably you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And so we're among the lowest of our peer group in terms of voluntary turnover, like less than 5%. So I think
that's a remarkable number, isn't it? And if I may just interject quickly here, because I want to, from a process point of view, Martine, thank you for that note that we are just past our time. We've got 2 to 3 minutes to wrap up. And so if I can ask Jod to just comment, if I may, if you would please, quickly on this notion of what you're doing, and then I'll do a quick wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Martine, I commend you for everything you're doing. So thank you. We've been on a journey. We've been on a diversity and inclusiveness journey for about 30 years now, 3 decades, and we're still far from being where we need to be or where we should be. 2 years ago, when I took over the CEO role, I also took over the Chief Inclusiveness Officer role. The diversity of thoughts is a huge competitive advantage. Bringing one's true self to work is a huge competitive advantage. To double down on Martine's comments, I was reading a study a couple of weeks ago from the Williams Institute at UCLA, and companies who encourage diverse opinions and encourage openness and diversity of thought have 20% better retention rates than the ones who don't. So the 5% is not too far. So we see it as a huge competitive advantage. 30% of our executive team are women, 15% visible minority, but we need to double down on those, and we're far from where we need to be. And I'd love to be talking to this team in 2 years from now and sharing much better numbers. So thank you, David. Thank you, Martine.
Well, let's all make a note to reconvene in the future.
Yes.
To have this to talk further. I would appreciate that. I want to note for our audience that I have been reading the moderated questions throughout, and I have integrated several of those on their behalf into the questions that I've been asking. So I thank our audience for joining us today. Of course, I want to thank the Chamber for providing this opportunity, and most importantly, Jod and Martine, thank you so much to each of you. It's been a tremendous honor to hear your thoughts and to hear your leadership perspectives. Thank you on behalf of the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce and all of the people that have joined us today, and I wish you both and your organizations well. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.